You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Wednesday. We are back and doing it. Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire through USA Today Sports Media Group. And we had yet another busy morning speaking with Michigan and TCU players as well as coaches. And we are going to have a guest today. We're going to bring on the Wolverine.com's Clayton Sayfie. He's going to join us for the last two segments. But we're going to spend the first segment. I want to give you my unbridled takeaways from the game, or not from the game, but from the press conference, rather. And there were a couple things that really stood out to me in this one. And again, the TCU confidence is at an extreme high. Michigan is confident, and certainly it's a little bit different, right? It's Michigan kind of knowing what it is, what it can do. TCU kind of puffing their chests out and saying, we belong here too, which is exactly what you would expect. And the funny thing is talking to Quentin Johnston, he was asked about that, and he said, he was more asked about Michigan, and he's like, well, what else do you expect them to say? But then I asked him particularly about the Michigan defense, and I was like, what do you see from the secondary? What stands out to you? And he said, nothing particularly. And I don't think he meant that necessarily as a slight. But in the similar vein, I mean, Michigan has been here before. Michigan has obviously earned, just as much as TCU earned the right to be here. And obviously there's going to be confidence on both sides. But I just felt I got the same type of inclination that I did on Tuesday, where it just kind of felt like the TCU guys were, I mean, it's not like they're not bowing down to Michigan, and I wouldn't expect that. And certainly Michigan's going to get their best shot, but it definitely has this feeling. I don't want to go as far as saying that TCU is overlooking Michigan, that they aren't paying them the due respect that maybe Michigan deserves. Michigan, on the other hand, definitely is paying TCU the respect it deserves. Jesse Minter spoke for 45 minutes today about what he was going to see from the Horned Frogs on Saturday. And I came away after transcribing all of it, which you can read on wolverineswire.usatoday.com. I came away with this feeling of kind of like, oh man, this is a bigger challenge than I thought. Whereas TCU is still likening Michigan very much to Kansas State. Michigan is sitting there saying the defense is looking at the TCU offense and saying it's like Ohio State, but with Talia Tagovailoa leading the charge. So certainly that poses some issues for the Wolverines from a defensive standpoint. I do get the feeling that TCU is going to have a lot of capability at moving the football. I think the question is, will they be able to score touchdowns? Because that is what Michigan has shown, that even in games against high-powered offenses, generally it has not allowed them to get into the end zone. Ohio State, obviously they got 2 touchdowns, and then aside from that, a couple field goals. Purdue moved the ball on Michigan, but had to settle for a lot of field goals. Having offensive players like Kendre Miller certainly gives them an added element, an added ability that they did not have to necessarily face in some of these other games. Certainly Purdue did not have someone of that caliber. Ohio State had a banged-up Mayan Williams, but Chip Trayanum certainly had his day. So it will be interesting to see how the Michigan defense attacks the litany of weapons that the Horned Frogs have. Now, that said, I do not think that the TCU offense is as talented as what they saw from Ohio State. I also think that what Michigan has in the trenches, and that goes on both sides of the ball, is superior to what they're going to have to face on the other side. So it will be interesting to see exactly how all of this kind of unfolds. I think that Michigan certainly has that. I think first and foremost, they have the right mindset. They've been saying, we can't get to that next step until we get through this one. And if we don't get through this one, then we don't get to have that next step. and I know TCU guys are out there saying, hey, you know what, we're preparing for 2 games. Michigan kind of seems like they are preparing for 1. So I think that is exactly the type of mindset that Michigan needs to have. I definitely feel like there is a little bit of a daunting type feel when it comes to that matchup of the TCU offense versus the Michigan defense. But we have seen, I still contend that Ohio State is a better offense overall. I mean, they went into the game against Michigan as the number 1 offense in the country with 11 games under their belt. So certainly Michigan has the capability of holding an offense like that, number 1 in the country in scoring, to just 23 points. So it'll be interesting to see if the Michigan defense can do to TCU like we saw maybe Texas do, holding them to 17 points. If Michigan can do that, I do not think that the TCU defense is going to be able to hold or stop Michigan despite what they are hoping for. But obviously, both teams have had basically a month to prepare. It will be interesting to see how this all works. All right, up next, we're going to bring in Clayton Sayfie. But before we do that, and I had this pulled up, and there we go. BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. If you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, we are back, and we are back with the Wolverine.com's Clayton Sayfie, as expected. 2nd time on the podcast, 1st time in person.
That's true. That is true. We're here. We're in Scottsdale. It's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I think one of the things what a good reason to have you on is because my memory after talking to some of these players, it gets wiped, and I don't remember anything that's happened.
It's hard.
Yeah, I don't understand like what's happening. But I just talked about Quentin Johnston and his kind of bravado, which it was kind of the opposite. And I didn't mention this before. And you had mentioned off air about Tay Barber and his demeanor. His was very different than Quentin Johnston's. And Tay Barber is going to be, he's a slot receiver. Mm-hmm. But he mentioned Mike Sainristil still as being a guy that he is on high alert for. Thinks just absolute world of him. What did you hear from him, and what were some kind of your takeaways from some of those guys that we spoke to from the TCU offense?
Yeah, so starting with Tay Barber, I'm going to write about this as well, but I think that's kind of a matchup to watch. I think Darius Davis, I believe is his name, also slot receiver for TCU. That's going to be a big matchup. Everyone's talking about the 6'4" wide receivers for TCU on the outside, but they still do a really good job underneath. Both of those guys, I believe, over 30 catches on the season, 35 and 34. So that's a lot right there. 70 catches almost of production. So I think those are going to be big matchups. I took wasn't over there for the Quentin Johnston stuff, but it seemed like that Tay Barber was a little more in tune with maybe what Michigan has on the back end. He was talking a lot about Mike Sainristil, still talking about how he's a converted wide receiver, so he kind of respects that position switch. But Max Duggan, too. I mean, he has a lot of respect for the Michigan defense. I thought that, it was interesting that basically every guy we talked to compared Michigan to Kansas State. And I get it because Kansas State is probably the best run offense in the Big 12, and they played them twice, and they kind of know what that's like. 2 things on that. 1, Michigan has a better quarterback and passing attack, I think, than Kansas State. And 2, Kansas State had some success against TCU on the ground, including, I think, 225 yards in the Big 12 championship. So I think TCU, and that's talking both, kind of both sides of the ball there. But I think TCU understands that Michigan is going to be a big challenge in that, maybe they are kind of like Kansas State on both sides with the physicality and all that. But, man, I think it's a completely different challenge. And I will say this, too. Listening to all the guys, Michigan's defense, TCU's offense, I feel like this game is going to kind of come down to the Michigan defense. And if it can stop some of those big plays, get a fast start, allow its offense to use that same script where they're not throwing and they're not coming from behind. So that was kind of my biggest takeaway of the day.
Yeah, and I think that's certainly what we're all looking at. I'm looking at the other side of the ball mostly because I think people aren't really talking about that, and I just don't think that TCU's defense is going to be able to stop Michigan's offense, and I don't think enough people are discussing that because we're looking at the shiny object, right?
Right.
And I think that is a big part. But at the same time, I do think that we're not one of the things that we're not talking enough about when it comes to the TCU offense versus Michigan defense, or really either side of the ball, is the trench play.
Yeah.
Because when we were talking about Ohio State, for instance, what were the reasons why we thought Michigan had a shot? And you and I were in the same boat where we thought pretty much all year that Michigan was going to beat Ohio State. Blake Corum goes down, and we kind of changed our tune.
Yeah.
But we were giving them a shot.
Absolutely.
Because the trench play. Michigan should have a solid advantage on both sides of the ball. Mm-hmm. But how do you see it? Is where do you think that when you evaluate this TCU offense versus the Michigan defense? I mean, they have all the high flying skill players, but is there anything else that you look at and say this is where Michigan's really going to shine?
Yeah, a couple things. And I'm no analyst like Jake Butt or anything like that, who formerly on this or on some of your shows, obviously, but. I will say this, looking at some of the numbers, PFF stuff, and then even talking to Steve Avila, their left guard, who's a consensus All-American this year, I feel like TCU has a really good interior offensive line, a couple guys in all Big 12, including Avila, but the tackles are a little susceptible to some pressure, and that's where I think a guy named Mike Morris comes into play for Michigan.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, exactly. He hasn't played much the last couple games. He missed the Illinois game, played 11 defensive snaps against Ohio State, and then missed the Big Ten championship game, but those guys play wider, Avila said, than really any edge guys they've seen all season. So Michigan's kind of different approach they've taken the last couple of years will be something different for TCU to try to attack. And then on the other side of the ball, we talk about this, but the 3-3-5 defense for TCU. Now, talking to people on the TCU side, maybe it'll look more like a 4-2-5, like what Michigan typically runs, or even a 4-3. But still, I mean, TCU's having to adjust a little bit here. Playing a team that is going to put out there at some point, right? We're going to see that 7-0 lineman look for Michigan, I think, that they rolled out in the Big Ten championship. We're going to see 3 tight ends. So that type of physicality, that type of, hey, we're going to bring everyone in the box. These days in college football, and especially in the Big 12, everyone's spreading people out, trying to get speed and space, quote unquote. Michigan's like, no, we'll take our guys over your guys. We'll bring them all together in the box and see who can win. And really, that's worked all year. So TCU's got to be ready for that. I think they're prepared. But it's going to look different on Saturday afternoon. We saw it last year with Michigan in Georgia. I mean, we thought Michigan could hang in that game. At least I did. I actually picked them to win.
As did I believe.
I mean, it's
we're
terrible
idiots.
thing.
We're stupid. That's
yeah,
fine.
I'm willing to admit that. But then, as we saw a year ago in that Georgia game, you get to kickoff. Even you get to that coin toss on. You see Jordan Davis out there for Georgia. And you're like, wait a minute, this is a different type of size, different type of speed. I'm not saying it's going to be that big of a difference between Michigan and TCU on Saturday, but I think there will be a difference. And, TCU could be up to the challenge, but at the same time, you never know until you kind of get to that game and see that type of personnel that Michigan has.
And I think that, when you look at TCU's line, it is undersized compared to what Michigan's going to be presenting. And that's on both sides. They do not have the heft that Michigan has. And I think that one of the benefits for Michigan, I guess we're still talking Michigan's offense versus TCU's defense, one of the benefits that they have is that they have seen a couple of offenses that run relatively similar to what TCU runs. TCU is not seeing the type of attack that Michigan brings. They can liken it to Kansas State because Kansas State likes to run the ball, but Kansas State is still a Big 12 style offense. So that's going to play a big role. And if TCU has to change its defense to be able to match what Michigan does, I understand you have almost a whole month to do that, but you're taking yourself out of your comfort zone. Now, it sounds like after we talked to Joe Gillespie yesterday, they probably aren't going to change things up drastically or anything. They want to try to stay in their bread and butter, but that doesn't bode well for, Michigan is, as I've said multiple times, it's like the basketball team was at the end of the John Beilein era. It's like, okay, you want to take away this piece and you want to take away this piece. You want to take away Mo Wagner. You want to take away Duncan Robinson. Congratulations. Now you're going to have to contend with Xavier Simpson and you're going to have to contend with all of these other guys. There really isn't one way. That's where, like Sonny Dyke saying, we take stop the run game. then that stops their offense. No, not exactly.
Pick your poison.
Yeah. They will play, and this is something that I had said after the Iowa game. Michigan will play you any way that you want to play, and they will find a way to win. They will outdo you. Like they out Ohio State at Ohio State. They out Iowa at Iowa. They did all of those things. They played the style of play that the other teams did because they are that versatile. Mm-hmm. But other teams, they have their bread and butter. TCU is not going to go out there and suddenly, and they can run the ball, obviously. Kendra Miller is one of the best in the country.
Yeah.
But they are not typically a ground and pound type team.
I will say, I think people are overlooking a little bit the balance that the TCU offense has. And actually talking to Mozzie Smith about that today, he said, why aren't people doing their due diligence? Why aren't they doing their research on this team? Because they can run the damn ball. And, I was kind of nodding along, like, you're right. Kendra Miller has over 1,300 rushing yards, 17 rushing touchdowns. Blake Corum's at, 18 or 19? Mm-hmm. I know his season was cut short, but he was having a heck of a season. Potentially the Heisman winner there. So those are no numbers to scoff at. I know the Big 12 is different than the Big 10, so, not getting into comparisons between Miller and Blake Corum, but that's still impressive nonetheless. So I think that they are a little more balanced. And then you have Max Duggan's legs to worry about as well. Even when you think you got him, you don't maybe. Type of thing where he maybe bottled up, but then he sneaks out and is able to pick up a first down with his legs too. So there's still a lot to be aware of for that offense. But you're right, going to the TCU defense, like, man, if you can't do it playing your base defense and you have to adjust, if that doesn't work, then what do you do?
And I have been definitely giving the due diligence, but we still end up talking about the pass game because that's what they're known for. But
I wasn't talking about
I know that. Yeah. But 25th both in the pass and the run each, in the country. This is not a team that is incapable, certainly, and it does pose some issues. But we are going to go ahead and move on. We are going to have more here in just one moment. But before we do, and I am completely underprepared, actually, that's it. There is no before we do. So we'll be back in a moment. All right, Clayton. So.
Am I still on?
Yeah, you're still on. We're still doing it. I just thought we had to go to an ad break that that there was no ad to read because I didn't do my due diligence. I was ready in segment 1.
Yeah, do your due diligence. Come on.
Yeah. But you and I are both kind of in lockstep, though, with the way that we look at this game. I listened to a little bit of, as you know, I listened to a little bit of your Thursday podcast on the flight out here, and I love Chris Ballas. I love Anthony Broom. Those are my brothers. You saw it differently than both of them. Give me a little bit of your thoughts of what you expect to happen in this game.
Well, first of all, go check that out if you're watching on YouTube, all that stuff, or listening over at the Wolverine. But shameless plug. But yeah, I guess the point really, that debate, quote unquote, that we had on our podcast, and it was really just kind of a discussion, but is when you look at Michigan all year, and I know the competition levels are different. You can't compare in college football, but we're gonna try a little bit. And Michigan kind of ran through its schedule. Again, it was a little weaker. Ran into minimal, turbulence along the way. You had the Illinois game, but I have to remind people, you didn't have Mike Morris in that game. You didn't have Luke Schoonmaker. You didn't have Donovan Edwards, and you didn't have Blake Corum for most of the time. So yeah, it was a struggle. They got through it. They were able to make enough plays on both sides of the ball to win that game. And then you have the big games, shorthanded, Ohio State, Purdue, and you're able to pull those out. So basically I was saying, man, Michigan's been very good, very smooth all season long. TCU, on the other hand, 5 or 6 comeback wins? Mm-hmm. They had to come back against 17 down against Oklahoma State, 18 down against Kansas State in the regular season matchup. I mean, those are some. And my question was, what happened to get down that much? Because that's a possibility for TCU, and I'm afraid of this. If I was TCU, falling behind by 17 to Michigan or 18 to Michigan. And then what? I don't think you're crawling out of that hole with the run game that Michigan has and just the defense it has. I mean, look, when Ohio State got down on Michigan in that third quarter, they couldn't get anything going offensively. They scored 3 points in that second half. So, I just think that Michigan, there's so many different ways Michigan can beat TCU, and there are a lot fewer scenarios where TCU beats Michigan, and I also wonder, why did they keep getting down so much and have to crawl out of holes against Big 12 teams that frankly weren't that good? Baylor being another one, a 6-6 team.
Max Duggan said that they certainly don't want to do that this time.
Yeah, he did joke that Max Duggan, I like that kid. I will say that. Heisman runner-up, he's also a hell of a player. But yeah, he said, we're definitely not trying to fall into these holes. So I did like that comment. And, of course, a fast start in this game, I think, for either team is going to be a big key.
This game really does feel to me like the inverse of last year's game against Georgia in a lot of ways. The only difference in this one is that they are not stylistically similar in the same way that Michigan and Georgia are. But it is to me like one of those types of games where, there's a reason why Michigan is a pretty heavy favorite, and there's a reason why you look at this Michigan team and how it matches up. Like this is not a matchup for TCU where you can sit there and look at on paper and say, yes, they definitely have the components to be able to take down Michigan. Could they? I'm not saying that they can't, right? Like they absolutely can. Any given Saturday, anything can happen. Mm-hmm. They do have playmakers that can, but from a schematic standpoint, from their 3-3-5 based defense, and for the TCU trolls that want to come on to that want to come on to the YouTube channel and say that we don't know what a 3-3-5 is. You apparently don't know anything about Michigan, because we certainly endured a 3-3-5 defense in the Big Ten under the Rich Rodriguez era. We're very well aware of what it is. It is just not conducive to stopping the type of...
I've seen the 3-3-5 against Big Ten offenses at Michigan.
Yeah,
doesn't work. Right?
It does not work. It is not the type of defense. It does not match up with...
No.
The 3-3-5 is built to be able to stall Big 12 style pass heavy offenses. Mm-hmm. It is not conducive to stopping power man ball with spread elements.
I will say TCU is more multiple maybe than we're giving them a little credit for, but
yeah, they will go in the forehand front.
I agree. Yeah, and they're it's just different really, and maybe that Michigan hasn't seen that this year really. You do look at their DNs; they're a little bigger. They're kind of more like Chris Jenkins type guys, as opposed to, well, not Mike Morris, because he's just he's literally the mutant. That's his nickname for a reason. I'll choose more of a guy like even Iabi Oki, right? Like that stature isn't going to fly in that defense, but they do different things well. So, they're still a solid defense in my opinion. I think they can do some things. The stats, the rankings, are a little bit skewed because you're playing against Big 12 offenses that are not only good, but also kind of built to put up a lot of yards and things like that, and a lot of passing yards allowed and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that it's going to be an adjustment for TCU to have to play a team like this.
And it's always a dangerous proponent to do transitive property. We all know that, but we've already seen a Big 10 versus Big 12 matchup.
Don't do this.
I think it's pretty evident due to Michigan didn't play Wisconsin. TCU did play Oklahoma State
with a different quarterback.
Both of them had different quarterbacks, but considering Michigan beat Ohio State which beat Wisconsin handily, and Wisconsin beat Oklahoma State relatively handily, Michigan's probably going to win something like 120-3. I think that is how transitive property works, and I think it's fair.
Yeah, I think so. That's how college football works. Yeah. You don't even need to play the game. Just let the committee decide who's going to win or something like that. Just figure out all the math, all the transitive options out there that there are.
If it's nice out, I will be at a cabana instead of State Farm Stadium, and we can just write our stories from there.
Yeah, we already saw what happened in the Wisconsin game, so
yeah, we did. We got the opportunity to go to the Guaranteed Rate Bowl.
Thank you to the Fiesta Bowl for getting us some nice tickets to that game.
We will not say bad things about you on the internet, but don't cross us. Anyway, the last thing for you, I don't know if you've put out any kind of final score, and if you don't want to, you don't have to, but do you have give me a general idea of how you think this game is going to go?
Yeah, I've said it so many different places at this point, so I will throw it out there. I got Michigan 34-24. I think that it's going to look really similar to that same script we've seen from Michigan all season long where, yeah, the other team may have some success in the first half. That defense may take a couple possessions to settle in, which is, you want to minimize that damage, though, because TCU is a dangerous team. You don't want to fall behind 14-0 or something like that. But I don't think they will. I think Michigan can also get off to a fast start. But I think we'll see TCU have some success. Then I think we will see Michigan continue to kind of wear them down, run the football in the second half. Donovan Edwards seems to heat up as the game goes on. I think he's averaging 10 yards a carry in the second half and 5 in the first half. 5 is nothing to nothing to scoff at, but 10 is really, really good. Of course, some big runs skew that data, but and then I think we're going to see that pass rush get going, and just kind of the same stuff we've seen all year from Michigan. And I'll take a 10-point win. Would it surprise me if Michigan wins by 21 or 17? Not necessarily, but it also wouldn't surprise me if Michigan lost this game either. I think TCU is good enough to win, despite all the things we've said. I feel like we've been fair too. We've been giving TCU their credit. You have a Heisman Trophy runner-up. He can win you a game. You have a really good running back. He can win you a game. You do have playmakers on defense, like the Jim Thorpe Award winner. He can win you a game. They have 14 interceptions on the season, so that's me giving them their due. But I do think it's going to be Michigan's night, and I think we're going to be at SoFi Stadium on January 9th for the national championship game, which is crazy to think about.
It is absolutely insane. It's not something that is really registering with me, even as I plan to go to Los Angeles regardless. But that is the reality that we live in. I think that, and we'll have a preview episode on Friday, but at the same time, I just think that, again, the trenches, you win football games in the trenches.
Yeah.
You can have all the skill. We see it against Ohio State. We've seen it twice now. You can have all the skill that in the world, right? And, Michigan last year is a different team, went up against a trio of insane wide receivers in Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And you can say what you want about them, but they still went up against Emeka Ibuka, Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming, and
An injured Cade Stover.
and apparently a super injured Cade Stover who doesn't want to talk about injuries because he was really banged up, you guys. But Michigan, they were fine.
No injuries on the Michigan side.
But they have seen, I would argue that what Michigan's gone up against with Ohio State and its talent, even at the running back position, Mayan Williams this year, Travion Henderson last year, that is more talent overall. We're talking 5-star talent across the board that have played like 5 stars, and Michigan won the trenches, so it doesn't matter. Michigan, I would be surprised if Michigan doesn't win the trenches. Now, Max Duggan is an X factor, right? Like I've talked off air. Michigan does see Georgia in the championship game. Georgia is more talented. Michigan has an X factor in J.J. McCarthy, right? So the X factor can make a difference.
It goes both ways. Let me just use this example real quick. Last year, look at Michigan's 2 losses. In the loss to Georgia, they did lose the trenches and clearly lost that game. In the loss to Michigan State, I think Michigan won the trenches, but Kenneth Walker was that X factor. So it can go both ways. But damn, watching 2 years of Michigan football like this, I feel like you have the better chance, right, to win the game if you have that trench play. And you're kind of seeing a little bit of a yin as others are yanging in college football with what Jim Harbaugh's doing. You're actually seeing a little bit in the NFL too. 49ers, certain teams are deciding, hey, we're just going to lean a little bit more on the run game. Look at the Ravens as well. So there's a little bit of a turning of the tide in that way too, and Michigan is set up pretty nicely for that.
And defensively, I mean, this defense is, honestly, it's built to stop the type of attack that we're going to see from the Horned Frogs. But I do think Michigan's going to end up winning by 3 scores in this one personally. But we will see. They play games. I say it almost every show. They play games for a reason. Anything can happen. We could be talking on Monday about I can't believe that Michigan lost by 3 scores because anything can happen. But in the lead up right now, I mean, it would be an absolute implosion on Michigan's part. I've spoken to people that you all know. I had a long conversation with Brett McMurphy yesterday, and he's like, Michigan has no business losing this game. He's like,
That's a little scary though, isn't it?
It is, but that's because, as them
You'd rather be in this spot though, absolutely, I'm not pointing at myself here, but the spot of that Michigan is in saying those things than the alternative, although it is a little bit of a scary proposition.
They're not playing. I don't think this is a situation. People are saying the pressure is all on Michigan. I don't think Michigan feels an ounce of pressure. I don't think
this team. That's not in this team's makeup.
No.
JJ McCarthy setting the tone. It just kind of the happy warrior mindset that Jim Harbaugh talks about. It is kind of real. As quirky as Jim Harbaugh is, he's always kind of able to figure out the psyche of his team and label it in a certain way. And I think you're right. This team plays loose, but they also know what they need to do to win. It's not like they're there's oversight or they're overlooking teams. No, they are absolutely locked in, but they're also loose and confident, and that's why they're 13-0.
Well, we will find out more in a couple days. We have 2 more episodes coming up. I'm not doing a mailbag on Thursday just because we have the team media day tomorrow. It's supposedly every player, so I think that's more important to get to some of the takeaways from that, and then we'll do the preview. Hoping to get Jake Budd on here. I haven't even talked to him, so I'm putting that out in the world. He's going to be here.
He'll see this and.
Yeah, well, he's going to be here, right? He's coming here tonight, the same hotel and everything. So, anyway, that's going to do it for us today. Thank you for watching and or listening. Thank you to Clayton Sayfie from the Wolverine.com. Go there, become a subscriber. I am actually a subscriber. There's 2 things that I subscribe to when it comes just to any kind of football coverage. I subscribe to Scott Bell's newsletter because he is amazing. And I subscribe to the Wolverine, and I am on that message board. I enjoy that message board.
It's a great message board.
Anyway, that's going to do it. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Clayton. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.